US President Donald Trump is fighting for the driver's seat in California. His administration has withdrawn the state's authority to set its own stricter limits on car emissions. Governor Gavin Newsom says Trump's actions risk damaging the climate and public health. Californian authorities say if the Trump administration has its way, the US car industry will get left behind in the global race to develop electronic vehicle technology. Trump says his administration's standards will apply to all states and will result in more cars being made at lower prices. In June, California made a deal with Ford, Honda, Volkswagen and BMW to produce cars that could drive 100 kilometres on 4.7 litres of fuel by 2026. That compares to the national standard of 60 kilometres. The biggest US state by population wants 15% of cars sold there to be electric or zero emissions by 2025. 10 other states have also adopted those requirements.
I'm confident we'll prevail eventually. It will take years and years and years, more uncertainty, more anxiety, but California will prevail because we're leaders in this space.
To break this down for us even further, seasoned investor and founder of Odin River David Levine joins us from New York City. David, tell us, first of all, the squabbling over this, over who has the right to regulate, how damaging is that for investment in this industry?
Well, thanks for having me. I think that uncertainty, especially around regulations, especially in the backdrop of a global macroeconomic slowdown, is not a positive. Automotive companies globally are being hurt by slowing fundamentals in China and in the United States. To add regulatory uncertainty to the picture makes it more difficult for investors to get comfortable. So this is definitely a negative in the near run. The long run implications, we'll see how it's resolved.
Critics of Trump's move say that this will lead to the US being left behind when it comes to clean car manufacturing. What do you think?
I think it's very interesting. If you look at California, if you look at something like electric vehicle sales for Tesla, they've been growing at a rate of 50 to 100% for the last period of years. So California has been a leader in electric vehicles in the United States. Now, if you look at China, China's actually been leading globally. And, look at the competitive landscape, which is, moving towards electrification. If we don't support, innovative states like China in this move towards electrification, it does risk the United States falling behind other countries like China who already have a lead. So this does create a risk. It's not certain the outcome of the situation. This is a battle. There's uncertainty about where it will go. But for sure, strategically, China's already got an advantage. California had been moving in a good direction. So we need to be careful, in my opinion, about moving in the wrong direction, which is away from electrification.
Trump has been determined to roll back the emission standards which were put in place under the Obama administration. What's his argument for doing that?
There is, to be fair, a bit of a double standard. Again, bringing it back to the conflict with China. If you look globally, the biggest emitter of coal-fired power plant pollution is China. They've actually been growing rapidly. They've announced many new coal-fired power plants. And so if you look at the global competitive landscape where you have China in a way, not playing fairly and that they're polluting more than the United States, I think the argument is let's renegotiate, let's have a level playing field. And once we have a level playing field, well, then we can look at emissions on kind of a apples to apples basis and make sure that everyone's competing fairly. So I think that's probably the best argument, meaning that we need to really look at this globally, have a kind of level playing field for all emitters. I think that's the positive. The negative would be, as I said, strategically slowing down electrification really isn't probably going to benefit anyone, in the long term or the near run. So I think those are the pros and cons. Probably, leaning more towards not being a good idea to slow down electrification, although I do understand, there is this competitive issue with China. They need to play fairly. So the administration has a very valid point there.
And just very briefly, not surprisingly, the automotive industry has backed Trump. What have they had to say about all this?
Well, again, if you look at the legacy players, companies that are producing the same kind of oil and gas fired powered cars for a long time, they have a business model, they have infrastructure that's put in place, they have capital in the ground, and from their vantage point, being able to return investment on that capital without having to innovate is a lot cheaper. And so just from a purely economic perspective, innovation hurts old companies. So their incentive is really going to will always be to preserve the past. I think that's the major reason probably they support this sort of position.
If you could name one thing that you think should be done or could be done to maybe inject some life and energy back into this sector, what would you like to see happen?
I think we should modernize our infrastructure. Modernizing our grid, modernizing rapid repowering of electric vehicles, really reimagining how the infrastructure in the United States supports the electrification of vehicles. In my opinion, being bold in that way is really the right move. And so I'd suggest investing more in infrastructure to support electrification and to provide the infrastructure that we need both for the grid and for vehicles themselves to be able to support the future of electric vehicles if we want to win, which I think we can. So that would be the one thing that I suggest that I think we can do in the coming years, and I hope we do.
David Levine, a really interesting insight and a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for your time.